I am here to share with you my story, but I want you to understand that it's only one of many, many stories from others who have survived. Each one has their own story to tell. I consider myself an extremely lucky survivor, and I'll tell you why. The reason why I'm so lucky is because I'm one of those very few who survived with my parents. And so after the war, when I was liberated, after an ordeal of 3 years under Nazi occupation, I had someone to turn to. I had someone to teach me right from wrong, and I was also lucky to have wonderful parents. That helps also. And this is what it was like for me. I come from Eastern Poland. The Nazis did not come to us until 1941. We heard how cruel they are. We heard what they're doing to the Jewish people, but we had no chance of escape. Because when you live in a small village, and the size of my village was only about 1,200 people, can you imagine? Out of the 1,200 people, we had about 350 Jews. Out of the 350 Jews, 32 survived the war. And we consider ourselves as extremely, extremely lucky that we had 32 survived, because a neighboring village who had 1,000 Jews, only 5 have survived. So for us, this seemed like an excellent number. And why was there no escape? Because when you come from a small village, what mode of transportation did we have? The only thing was a horse and buggy. When you're a family with 6 little children, and my mother had the last baby just 10 days before the war started. So when the Nazi army marched through my village, my baby brother was only 20 days old. Can you imagine? Where can you run? If you got on a horse and buggy and tried to escape into Russia, before you reached the next big town, the Germans were there already, coming through a different route. So there was absolutely no escape. The only people who escaped from my village were a few young men who had bicycles. They got on their bicycles, and if they were lucky to take a certain route, they came into Russia and served there during the war in the army probably, and they are one of the 32 who have survived. So what was it like? When the army went through, I want you to know, nothing bad really was happening to us. They were soldiers. Yeah, they came into our garden and they dug up some potatoes or pulled out some of our string beans because they needed to cook. But that was fine. This is how, soldiers behave. But they did not come in and harass us or tell us that we are terrible people just because we're Jews. They marched through and that was it. But once they went through, later on the civilian administration came in and they took a look in our village and they said, now this place is much too small to establish a garrison here. We will do something else. We will ask for a volunteer militia from our local Christian population, and they will keep law and order in this little place. And they went on, of course, to establish in a bigger city. But at the same time, they immediately hung out on the marketplace laws pertaining to Jews and laws pertaining to Christian people. To Christian people, it was very simple. We came to liberate you from communism, and if you'll follow our rules, nothing bad will happen to you. One thing you must know, you can never give shelter or comfort to any Jewish person, because if you will, you too will be punished the same as the Jews. And I want you to know, I know for a fact that they lied to the Christian people too, because after they killed all the Jews, many Christians also were killed by the Nazis. And for Jews, the very first thing on top was all your civil rights are taken away. The next thing was you must give up everything of value. starting with gold items, silver, any kind of metal, warm clothing, warm boots. They enumerated everything what we must give up. And at the end, they said, if you will not follow our requests, you will be punished by that. I mean, he will be killed. I don't know how to say it. Not everyone, but they would single out a group and say, hold them as hostages and say, if you are not delivering what we want, these people are going to be killed. And so people gave away everything they had just to make sure that the others, because everybody knew the other person in our village. You know, you knew that it would be somebody that was dear to you, either a member of your family. So we gave away everything they asked of us. What did they take away from us that I remember as a child? Because as Ms. Smith mentioned, I was only 10 at that time. I remember my parents had to give up their wedding bands because that was made of gold, and that's the only thing they had, to be honest with you. They took away all the fur. My father had a fur coat, they took that away. We had a cow, a horse, that was taken away. But if they would have taken away everything we had and let us live, we would have been very, very grateful. And immediately the killing started. Now, who did those killings in a small village like ours? It might have been different in bigger places, but in a small village like ours, it was the job of our militia to do the dirty work for the Nazis. And can you imagine how painful it was to us? Because you live in a small place and you know everyone. Those young men who volunteered to become militiamen and become our executioners were our neighbors. We worked the fields together. We celebrated public holidays together. You know, we interacted in the marketplace all the time. We knew each and every one of them. And that was a very painful thing. And I always ask this question because you're young people, I want you to think, what makes one people hate another people to such an extent that when a foreign power comes in and occupies your country, instead of, you know, not liking them or whatever you might, you know, reaction be, but to volunteer and kill your neighbors of yesterday? Where does such hatred come from? I want you to stop and think, because there's plenty of hatred going on in the world today also. We still discriminate against others who are different than we are. Is this the right thing to do? Little babies, when they are born, they don't know of hatred. It takes a long time when they are exposed to the rhetoric that others are different and are not good as you are. That's when the hatred develops. So you as young people, if there is anybody who will try to teach you to discriminate and to hate others, fight back. You be the heroes. Tell them this is the wrong thing to do, because hatred leads to destruction. And after the first group of people were singled out and killed because they called them communists, I doubted whether any one of them was really a communist, because people did not even, they were so, you know, uneducated, they didn't understand the ideology of communism. But they must have worked in the office somewhere during the Russian occupation, which was from 39 till 41. They were singled out first and they were killed. And afterwards, every month almost, a group of Jews were singled out, either for humiliation or for, when I say humiliation, I'll give you an example. They have decided to burn all the holy books. So they brought out, do you know what the Torah is? That's the Jewish scripture. And they would take it out on the marketplace with all the other holy books, and they wanted to force their rabbi to set it on fire on the Sabbath day. Can you imagine such degradation? The rabbi would have let himself be killed and not do it. I remember we could see from our window how one of the militiamen was hitting him with the butt of his rifle over the head, and he was bleeding, but he would not budge, and he would not set the books on fire. A young kid came over who was a rascal of a little boy, and he wanted to save the rabbi, so he put he lit the fire, and they got burned up. This is what I call humiliation, you know, that I mentioned earlier. And the only time that I saw the Einsatzgruppen, the special units for killing Jews, come into our village and help our militia was when they had one of the larger killings, where they killed 54 people in our village in one day. Now, 54 out of 350, that's a large number, and that was the biggest thing that affected us, because there were relatives, neighbors. My mother's cousin was amongst them, and these were whole families, grandparents, parents, and the little children, all taken out and shot outside of our village. Of course, they would always take 10 Jews to ask them to dig the ditch where they would kill the number of people. And one of the men who was there told us the cruelty of the Nazis. When one of the elder men, a grandfather, couldn't stand to see his whole family killed and begged them that he should be killed first, because his daughter still had an infant on her hands, and he didn't want to see that to happen. So they did the opposite. They made him stand to the side, and they started from the baby, and then the children, and then his daughter in the family, and he was killed last. We didn't dare to ask after that for any favors from them, because we knew that it is going to be worse if we ask or beg them for mercy. There was no such thing as mercy from them. The first 15 months that I still lived in my village, I saw all the Jewish people killed, with the exception of the few that have survived, by militiamen and the Einsatzgruppen. And at the end of those 15 months, they came to our village, what they called the final solution. They have decided not only our village, because it was a small place and they didn't have total control, but a couple of others, that they will make it clear of Jews. They'll kill all the Jews. Now the question is, if we saw what they are doing, if we saw that there is no escape, you know, why didn't we run and hide someplace? Where could we? How could we? Because if they used to have a roll call once in a while, and if one person was missing, they would arrest another 10, take them as hostages. They would put the burden on us that we must find that person and bring him. Otherwise, the 10 people will be killed. Now, it happened once. We could not find that person. And 10 people paid with their lives for one person trying to escape. After that, nobody dared to escape, because they knew if they will try to run away, 10 others will be killed. And when you live in a small place like this, it'll probably be some members of your family or your neighbors or your schoolmates, because I remember my cousin, who was 20 years old at that time, told his mother, I have a chance, maybe I should try to hide. And she said, if your life is so dear to you that you don't care how many people will die for your escape, then go ahead and do it. And you know what? He did not. He did not, because he knew that it would be too much of a price to pay. You'll excuse me for 1 second. Now, what happened the day when they have decided that our village should become Judenrein? They rounded up, the Einsatzgruppen came, helped our militiamen. They surrounded the whole village. They asked us to come to get into the marketplace because they will resettle us somewhere else. And everybody came out in the marketplace, and all of a sudden we realized they're not letting us take anything. This is not a resettlement. This is something else. And they have taken us from that marketplace. Once they rounded up everyone, a few of the younger people at that time managed to run away and to hide somewhere. And they took us to the only public house we had, and we knew that what is happening, we're waiting for our execution. I have left out something very important, which I need to backtrack. I mentioned to you that where will you hide and who would give you shelter? There were very few who wanted to take a chance with their lives, because the Christian people who would hide a Jewish person, when they found out, they would kill that person too. And yet I want you to know there were such individuals who took a chance with their lives and helped. One farmer who lived about 2 kilometers away from our village on a little homestead, when he found out that the Germans are killing slowly every Jewish person in our village, and he also knew everyone, he would come and bring us a jug of milk and live in the back of our house, because he knew that my mother had a baby, and he knew the Nazis took away our cow. So from time to time, he would come and bring us milk. This in itself was an act of extraordinary kindness, because if another neighbor who was not as kind as he is would see him do it and would mention it to our militia, he would definitely be punished. And yet he continued doing it all through the time that we were in our village, still in our village. And this very same man one day saw my father in the backyard, and he told him, he says, "Look, I see what is happening. Slowly they will kill all of you in smaller groups. When you will know that your name is on the list of the people to be taken away, I will leave my barn door open. If you will make it to my barn, I will find a way to hide you." Can you imagine what a generous offer this was? Extraordinary. The word spread in our village that here is a man who is kind and is willing to help. The day when the final solution came, this one man saved 10 Jewish people, 9 men and 1 woman. Can you imagine? He left the barn door open, they hid there, and later he made an excellent hiding place under the pigsty where he kept them for 10 months. Now, these are the heroes of that generation. He has been honored in Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is in Jerusalem, the place where they have all the memorabilia, everything, you know, recorded what happened during the Holocaust. And here in Wilmington, we also have, near the Jewish Community Center, a little garden made, and we call it the Garden of the Righteous Gentiles. And I have planted a tree for this extraordinary man, because there are very few, and they should not be forgotten. They should be our role models. What one individual can do for others, for helping and saving other lives. You will excuse me for it's warm in here. No, I'm fine. Thank you. So I'm back to the day when they have decided to make my village what they called Judenrein, clear of Jews. They put us in the only public house that we had, and we immediately realized what was happening, because they singled out 10 men, they gave them shovels, and they took them away. And when they came back, they told us where they dug the ditch and what is the place where it will be our final resting place. I cannot tell you what the feeling at that time. They kept us a whole day, and it's at dawn the next day when they took out everyone except for a few families. And I remember by then I was already 11 and a half years old, and I could not think of anything. How do I possibly, I knew that I would be killed, but I did not want to walk up to the ditch. And I thought to myself, when my turn will come, when they will take me, I was a very skinny girl and a good runner, and that I will, at one point where there are some trees, that I will start running there, and they will shoot me in the back, but I'm not going to walk up to the ditch, because I remembered another execution where a friend of mine was shot, and he was not dead, and they would not waste another bullet on him, and he was buried while he was still alive. And this thought was just bothering me terribly. And also, I could not stop thinking of, I can run and they can shoot me in the back, that would be okay. But my mother carrying the baby to the execution, how difficult this is going to be for her. And this is what happened a couple hours later. Towards the day was coming to an end. We were all sitting on the floor and just waiting for orders when these executions will start. When a Nazi officer came into the door with a list in his hand, what he called useful Jews, nützliche Juden. And because he needed them to work for them a little bit longer, he called out the names. The man's name was called out. He was allowed to take his wife and his 2 children and get out. And they called like this about 5 families. We did not realize that we might be eligible to go out. Our name would be there, because my father didn't have any trades. He wasn't a mechanic, he wasn't a bricklayer, or a tailor. These are the people that they have singled out. But at the very end, they called my mother's name. And it was unbelievable. My mother got up with the baby on her hands and grabbed my father. She wanted to make sure that he too will be able to come out with her and the rest of the children. And we came up to the door, and this Nazi officer looked at her and he said, "Are you the seamstress here in this village?" And she said, "Yes." So he says, "I want dresses made for my wife. I think I'm going to let you live a couple of weeks longer." Can you imagine? It doesn't seem like a long time, a couple of weeks, but when you know that you still have a chance to get out of this slaughterhouse, and the others do not. That feeling, I remember I ran from there to our house as fast as I possibly could. I don't think my feet touched the ground, because you wanted to separate yourself so quickly from those who are doomed and those who are going to die shortly. And we came into our house, and it was already totally empty, because this is what they did in the other executions. When they killed a number of Jews, they would come into their houses, take out everything that was there, put it on the marketplace, and not only the Christian people in our village, but from surrounding villages could come and take anything they wanted. And at dawn that morning, they killed everyone. I shouldn't say everyone. One person managed to escape. One young man, he was 17 years old, and he schemed the same thing as I did, to run at that particular place where there are some trees, and you know what? He made it. He made it, and to this day, he's in his 90s already. He lives in Detroit, Michigan, and he's like a family member. We're constantly in touch and comparing the thoughts of an 11-and-a-half-year-old and this 17-year-old young boy who dared to run and made it. It was a miracle, let me tell you. Well, my mother was let out because she was a seamstress. How is she going to sew dresses when everything was gone? They took away her sewing machine. And so she went to the Nazi officer and asked for permission to reclaim her sewing machine. And he says, of course, gave her a piece of paper, and as my mother was approaching the warehouse where they collected all the belongings of the Jews, she hears two people arguing. A woman whom she knew quite well because she lived down the street is arguing with one of our militiamen. She says, Eva was my best friend, and she would want me to have her sewing machine, so I want to have it. And he was arguing, he says, I couldn't care less whose friend you are. My mother wants a sewing machine. I'm taking this sewing machine for my mother. And as they are arguing together, you know, my mother walks in with a permission slip to claim it. Can you imagine how disappointed both of them were? But they gave it to her. And my mother told this lady, she says, listen, Helka, I heard you say that you were my best friend. It is true, we were very good friends before the war, but is this how good friends behave? You knew the Nazis took away my cow. You knew I had a baby. Did you come around even once to offer me some milk for the baby? Is this how friends behave? She was total, she didn't know what to say because she knew this was the truth. And so, that very same day, I want you to know, when we left, when they took us away to a ghetto, to a neighboring town, we found on our doorstep a jug of milk and a loaf of bread. She didn't have to tell us. We knew immediately who did it. And why am I telling such an insignificant story to you, young ladies? Because I want you to know that kindness and goodness is also something that needs to be taught, you know, either at home or in the school. It doesn't come automatically, just like hatred, you know. People learn from negative rhetoric about others or other sources. Kindness is also something that we must practice and we must learn from either home, of course, if your parents feel the same way, and if not, from our teachers, from school, because it is so important. You have no idea what it means to a person who has nothing, you know, to be kind enough to give them something so that at least they will not be hungry and they will not be, you know, homeless on the street. It is very, very important, you know, the feeling of obligation to be kind and caring for others. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you, in your school you probably teach it in any case. And what happened in the ghetto in that neighboring town? My father, who worked every single day, every able-bodied person had to go to do hard labor every day, including my brother, who was only 15 years old, and he too was always taken away to do hard labor. And one day when my father was coming back from a day's work, walked by a warehouse where they were collecting plants from which medication was extracted. And he looked into that warehouse and he saw that the plants are rotting. And so he approached the manager of this plant and he told him, he says, listen, the Nazis will think it's sabotage and they'll hold you responsible. You have to do something about it. He says, I don't know what to do. So he told him, go to one of the Nazi officers and tell them that I need your, I see that you're watching the clock. We need to.
I would wait for Action News to come.
Ah, okay. Tell them that you need my services, and I will be glad to come and help you here in the warehouse. And so he did. He went, and the Nazi officer understood right away, if somebody needs you, go ahead, take him. And my father started working in that warehouse. And immediately, we felt so much better, thinking my mother just finished the dresses, we will not be useful, they will take us away somewhere. But my father is now a useful person. Maybe we will somehow manage to stay here in this town. However, one Nazi officer did not know what another one has promised, and one day, two trucks rolled into our ghetto with a list of people to be taken away, and of course, our name was on those among those people to be taken away. And there is nothing you can do. If they said that you must go, you're surrounded with guns all the times. You cannot argue with them. And I remember we were already all sitting on the trucks. My father was the last one to jump up on the truck because he was helping us, the kids, to get on there. And immediately in the distance, he took a look, and he has noticed the men for whom he was working in the distance. What a extraordinary lucky moment. He told him, run quickly to the Nazi officer that gave you permission for me to work with you. Tell him that you need me. And so he did. And he returned within no time with a permission for us to disembark because he was still useful. Can you imagine? Now take a look. Not only did you have to have the right skills to survive another execution, not only did you have to be proactive to make sure that maybe doing this or that, I can live a little bit longer, but you also had to be extremely lucky. Because if my father would not have noticed that man in the distance, we would not have been here. Not a single person of those 2 truckloads survived. We found out after the war what a horrible death they have met. And so we remained in that ghetto for a little bit longer, and again something extraordinary happened. It was one lucky moment after another, so to say. At that time, resistance to the Nazi occupation started to form already. Young men who knew if the Nazis will catch them, that they will be killed. And so they formed fighting groups in the forest. We refer to them as partisans. As you might, if you don't know what a partisan is, then think of freedom fighters. And they were trying to disrupt the Nazi war effort the best they possibly could. Amongst those groups, in one particular one, there was a Jewish young man. I don't know why, but it's swarming here. That's why I have to find an excuse why I'm drinking so much. No, that's okay. So one of the young men who knew that there are still a few Jews left in this very small ghetto, only for useful Jews, and we knew what happened in other places. If they don't need you anymore, they just don't bother. They just take you out and they kill you. I don't know whether he decided or his commanding officer decided that they are going to make a name for themselves and they are going to attack the German garrison in that town and destroy it and become famous as fighters. We had no idea what was happening. The shooting started early in the morning, and we didn't know why and what is happening. I remember my father told us the only thing, get dressed and get under the beds to hide from the bullets that were so close by. And we were laying for, I cannot, how long, maybe a half an hour or so, when finally the shooting stopped and my father ran up to the window to see what's happening. We were the last house of the ghetto, and the windows were boarded up from the other side. And through the crevice, as he looked out, he noticed this young man that he knew and recognized. And so he knocked in the window, and the man turned around, and he saw that we are still in the ghetto. So he helped my father break away the planks with which the window was, secured, broke the window, and he said, don't even look back, because everybody already escaped. As we were retreating, I saw that the gates in the ghetto were locked, so we broke it open. We told the people if they want to leave, they must run through the swamps into the forest. Somebody will give them directions where to go. The first couple of houses ran away. We are the last house. Nobody bothered to tell us. Again, a miraculous incident. If my father didn't come up to the window, we would have been left behind, and all the people in our house would have been killed the next day. I'm sure of that. But we jumped through the window only with what we had. I remember what I wore. I cannot remember what my sister wore. I'm trying to retrace it because it was so many years ago. I had a very light spring coat that's all that I had left. And with nothing else, we jumped through the window, through the swamps into the forest. A guide showed us where to go. And then finally we found a little resting place. We were ecstatic. For the first time, in almost 2 years, there was nobody with a gun standing behind us. And we thought, maybe now we have a chance. Maybe at least one or two of us will manage to escape, to survive, and tell the free world what the Nazis have done to us. But our euphoria, our gladness, was dumped immediately when the commanding officer came up to us. They did make us a beautiful, when I say beautiful, they must have killed a cow or something and cooked a big stew. And for the first time, we had something, substantial to eat. And he came up and he said, look, I need young men with rifles to help me fight. I don't need middle-aged people with children. You're totally useless to me. He said, I will take you, one thing I'll do for you, I'll give you a guide, and I'll take you to a faraway forest, and there you'll have to, exist by yourself. And I remember we walked that very same day after escaping from the ghetto. We were still exhausted from the ordeal, emotionally and physically. A guide took us to a faraway forest. I remember we walked all night until we reached the other forest, because women with little children, it takes a long time to dragging. After the war, I tried to duplicate that marshroute, and what did I find? That you could cover it in 20 minutes, with a car. And we walked all night from the evening until the next morning, until we reached that forest. The only thing the partisans did is they helped us make a bonfire, and they told us, guide it with your life. If you let it go out, you will surely die. You see the cold today? That's nothing to compare what we have in Eastern Poland. Especially 1942 was a very severe winter. And so the November 1st is when they attacked us and liberated us from the ghetto. So we must have arrived the 2nd or the 3rd in that other forest. And here, with a little baby on our hands, how do you survive? With absolutely nothing. I mean, we were told where the nearest villages are, but we had nothing to give to the farmers in exchange for food. So what choice did we have? We went begging. And we would beg from the farmers. We told them we have nothing to give in return, but we're starving here in the forest. Could you give us something to eat? And most of them, I must say, were so kind. And even a few small potatoes or a piece of cabbage or a few small beets, it was a treasure. We would bring it back to the forest, and my mother would cook it and divide up between every child, an equal portion. And that had to be enough for the day. I remember there were many days where we had only, she would cook the potatoes that we brought, and there would be 3 potatoes per child. And this had to be, you could eat it all at once, or you can do whatever you wanted. And I'll tell you what my strategy was. It is funny because it's something that I remember. The first time I ate all 3 potatoes at once, and it was impossible to lay down in front of that fire because you were so hungry that your stomach hurts and everything, And I said to myself, next time, I'm not doing it. And so next time when my mother cooked the potatoes and each one got the 3 potatoes, I ate probably 2 and 1 I hid. And my brother, who would roam around everywhere in the forest, found it. And he ate it. And I will tell you, I said to myself, I would probably do the same thing, because when you're hungry, you take away the last bite from anybody. And I said, that's not a good strategy. So the next time, when my mother gave us the portion of potatoes, I left 1 for the night before we go, but this time I carried it in my bosom, you know, until the nighttime, so that nobody will steal it from me. And in the evening, when I would sit down to eat my potato, you think I could eat my potato? My sister, who was 2 years younger than I, and she constantly complained that she's hungry, would sit there and look in my eyes and say, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. I had to cut a piece of potato that I was hiding, you know, for the evening, and give her a piece also, because otherwise she would not stop telling me how hungry she was. And I will tell you, once we came to this country, and God has blessed us, and we have had everything, and she would come and visit me in my house, and always with a little present. And I would say, don't buy me anything, I have everything. She'd say, no, that's payback for the piece of potato that you gave me when we were in the forest. You know, these are small incidents, but you know, a strategy for survival. We think about all kind of things, how to make it another day. Tell me how much more time I have, so I will know how to condense.
We're fine.
We are fine? Great. Because those 20 months hiding in the forest with a little baby cannot be condensed, you know, in 5 minutes. But thank you. I was given permission to take a little extra time, so I'm delighted. The first few weeks laying around that bonfire was so miserable. I mean, it etched itself in my mind that I cannot forget it. We were immediately infested with lice because we had nothing to change in laying in the mud. And so we found there in the forest a man who was a barber, and he escaped also an execution. And he had a pair of clippers in his pocket. And my mother asked him to cut all our hair, because if you don't have any hair, maybe the lice will not cling to us as much. But the cold and the wind, even with hair, it's terribly cold. But when you have no hair, and can you imagine, we didn't even have a piece of rag, any kind of rag to cover our head to feel a little bit warmer. It was, I remember shivering constantly, you know, nonstop from the miserable cold. You would lay in front of the fire, you were burning in the front, and your back was freezing, and you had to turn to warm up the back a little bit. I will never forget those days, the misery. I remember when I used to start shaking so hard, I asked my father, because I believed every human being had a soul in them, and I asked my father, is how I will die? My soul will jump out of me because I'm shaking so hard, you know, and that's how I will die. And he assured me that that's not how it's going to happen. But I learned very quickly how it happens. There was a little boy about my age who also escaped an execution, ran away, and we found him in the forest. And what happened, my mother, being a kind person, always tried to shelter anybody she could around our bonfire. And so he hung around our fire, and whatever little food we had, we shared with him. But one night, he became disgusted in just fighting for a little spot, and he moved away about 10 yards, no more. Under a tree, he fell asleep. And next morning, we found him, he was frozen to death. And I remember my father with another man who wanted to make a shallow little grave for him. And we kids, we had nothing to do. We were just dragging after them. And I heard my father say, what a lucky child. He didn't suffer. He just laid down, fell asleep, and he died peacefully. And after that, the only thought that was in my mind, if only my mother will not watch me, and I will be able to move away and lay down and fall asleep and not wake up, that would be the greatest thing that could happen to me. Because the misery of the cold and the infestation of flies and the hunger, everything taken together, you felt like this is worse than being dead. That's how the feeling was. And so my mother, of course, would not let us move away. But then later on, some young men escaped, and they came to our forest, and they probably had a way of digging a ditch. And so they made a underground, like little bunker or whatever you might call it, where you could hide from the elements. And when they had pity on us, they saw a family with little children and with a baby, so they helped us also to make a dugout like this. And at least at that time, we had already a little bit of shelter, but we didn't have peace, because the Nazis found out where the Jews are hiding in the forest, and as soon as they had a chance, can you imagine how important it was to them to kill all the Jews, that they took a whole, I don't know what size of a unit of soldiers from the front lines. They brought them back to surround the forest and to try to kill as many Jews as they possibly can. We called it a blockade. And the first winter, we had to endure 3 blockades when they came, surrounded the forest, and tried to, kill as many as they could. And many were killed. We were so extremely lucky, I want you to know. At the end, if you'll remember, because I want to make sure that I get other things in that I want to bring across, ask me how we survived the first blockade, because nobody wanted to run with us. We had a little baby on our hands. And so we were on our own. And yet, in the first blockade, not a single person from our little group was killed. In the other groups who did not want to run with us, who were young people, young men or women, they encountered the Nazis, and many of them were wounded and killed. And they could not understand how it was that we, with a little baby, we made it and they did not. And so they realized, when they came up with the conclusion that it was the luck of the little baby that we have survived without any casualties. And so the next blockade, instead of running away from us, they tried to come with us because they thought the baby was like a lucky mascot who saved us from sure death in the first blockade. 3 blockades that winter, my father realized that we will not, escape maybe the next time. Then Germans know where Jews are hiding. And so he says, we're going to go and look for another hiding place. We found out that somewhere closer to our village, there is an elevation, like a little hill, that is surrounded with swamps all around. And there's some Jews are hiding there. And so after going through in the springtime, typhoid fever, all of us except for the baby. And this was raging all over Europe, but somehow not a single one of us died from the typhoid fever. We were so malnourished, we were like skeletons almost, and infested with the lice, and yet none of us died from the typhoid fever. Do I have time to say another act of kindness?
Sure, we'll give you just a few more minutes.
Okay.
It's so beautiful. Your stories are so beautiful.
My mother was laying for a whole week with tremendous high temperatures, and she was totally delirious. She didn't understand what was happening all around her. And then she woke up one morning, and she said to my father, I think I could make it if I had a piece of butter to swallow. I don't know where she got this. And my father went to a village nearby. People didn't know him. You know, a piece of butter, what it meant in those days during the war years. And he told the farmer the story about his wife is about to die, but she wants a little piece of butter. And he gave it to her. These are kindness of people, you know, that is not to be forgotten. My mother swallowed that piece of butter and started getting better day after day until she became well again. When we arrived in the new place on that hill, it took us a day and a night to walk there because we were so emaciated, all of us. We could probably move a few yards and we had to rest again. But once we arrived, we found the Jewish people that were hiding there, and one of them let us go into their dugout so that we will have a place to lay down and sleep. And the very first time my father went to the village, to the nearby village, to get some food, he walked into the first house, and a farmer recognized his voice because he was already beyond recognition, all overgrown probably, and so skinny. And the farmer says, "Do I hear, is this the voice of David Swirsky?" And he said, "Yes." He says, "What are you doing begging? You were such a respected citizen in your village, and now you became a beggar." He says, "I have no choice. I have nothing to give you. The Germans took away everything. My wife and the children are in the forest, and they are starving. What choice do I have?" He says, "I am not going to let you go begging in this village. The people know you, and they all respected you, and I don't want you to lose your little bit of dignity that a human being has." He says, "You stay in my house." And he sent his 2 sons to go through the village and to tell them that my father is there and to donate whatever they could. And I remember my father came back to the forest that afternoon, it was late afternoon, and he brought a big bag of black peas and even a bigger bag of potatoes and a few other small things, but I cannot remember what it was. But the most important thing, my mother, for the first time, cooked a soup of black peas and potatoes. And we had only one small can that we shared amongst everyone in the family. And when my turn came to have that can of black pea soup that she cooked, and I could not believe it, how good it tastes. I ate it slowly, and I said to myself, we were so stupid before the war. We could have had all the black peas we wanted. Why didn't my mother cook black pea soup? And I promised myself that if I will survive the war, and if I will have enough black pea soup to eat, not just one small can, but until my stomach will hurt, I will never ask for anything else. That was the greatest thing that I have thought that I could have. Now, imagine to be in the forest for 20 months. It's probably an advertisement. And it's true. Who else was going to call me? Can you imagine? Can you imagine what one had to go through? Now, liberation came for me early because I lived in Eastern Europe. And the area where I lived, we were liberated in 1944. I want you to know the day when we found out that we are free, that the Germans have, retreated and the Russians are following them, was July 4th, 1944. I had no idea that July 4th was a special day. But we picked July 4th also for a day to get married because this was the day when I was liberated from Nazi Germany. The war went on for another year almost. People were killed in the concentration camps, by the hundreds of thousands. We had no idea the concentration camps existed because from our area, This is the area where they dubbed and they called the killing fields. They did not bother taking people to concentration camps. They shot everyone on the spot. And there is a French priest who took it upon himself to record how many people died by shootings in the eastern part of Poland and Russia. And he came to the conclusion that more people were shot in the killing fields, what they call, than in the concentration camps, because they did not bother taking us. They simply killed everyone on the spot. I want you to know that I consider myself one of the luckiest people, as I mentioned, because I survived with my parents. When the war was over, and we found out that we called it the free world. The free world knew what the Nazis were doing and did nothing to help us. We were so disappointed and embittered that I used to go around, I was 13 years old at that time, and would say, I hate everyone. I hate all those people who didn't do a thing to help us. And my father heard me talk like this, and he was very unhappy, and he told me, sit down, I need to have a talk with you. I heard you say that you'd hate so-and-so and so. I don't even want to mention all the names, the people that I hated for not doing anything to help us. He said, we were victims of hatred. Did you like it? I told him, no, I hated it. So he says, then why would you do it to somebody else? They don't know that you hate them. You are destroying yourself if you will be carrying in you those feelings of hatred and revenge. It's the wrong thing to do. Do the opposite, he says. Become a role model of kindness and caring and tolerance towards others, and you will be a much happier person than those who are seeking revenge and carry in their hearts hatred. And this is why I say I was so lucky to have had this kind of wonderful guidance. I have raised my children like this, and my grandchildren have benefited the same way. And I must tell you, you as young people, when somebody tells you that they hate you, disregard them, ignore them, and teach the opposite. Teach the opposite. Teach them tolerance and acceptance of people who are different. We are all different from one another. And yet we're all the same children of God. I thank you so much for listening to my